Welcome to ArtSpark Texas Community Conversations, and we're here with Thinkery and Verse. I'm the Director of Outreach for ArtSpark Texas, Susan Slattery, and here with me today are Dr. John Meyer and Karen Alvarado. They're also the co-creators of a stage play and podcast, Aftershock, Replica. And they're going to be talking about that and some other things that they've done in the past and things that they've been doing with ArtSpark Texas. And thank you all for joining us very much. And I'd also like to introduce our ArtSpark Texas Executive Director, Celia Hughes, who's going to tell us a little bit about Thinkery and Verse and John and Karen, and then we'll start our interview.
Thanks, Susan. I appreciate it. Looking forward to this conversation tonight. Just a 2 minutes of background. In 2019, ArtSpark was part of a citywide festival called AVA Fest, the Austin Veteran Arts Festival. And so through that, I was introduced to Karen and to Johnny, in Thinkery and Verse because they were writing and developing and producing what ended up to be 2 performances during AVA Fest. And I came on as the executive producer somewhat for those 2 productions and was really, really impressed with the work that they did and the shows and the production value and all of that. I really loved it. And so the Aftershock La Replica was a play that they did at Teatro Vivo here in Austin. And it's a remarkable, I don't know, they'll tell you more about it, but to me it was like a memory play of soldiers and their loved ones, dating back to World War II up through the present conflicts, looking at it from a Latinx point of view, which really hasn't been done. So I went to them and I said, you know, I really would like to tour this. I think it's really a valuable and important work, and so let's take it on tour. And then there was this teensy tiny little thing called COVID that came, and we weren't able to do that. So we put our heads together and we were like, let's do a podcast. And so they just tackled it with ferocity, and we ended up with 8 marvelous episodes. And so I'm delighted to be here tonight to talk with them a little bit about that process. And what is veteran art? What is Thinkery and Verse? And how this all came to be. So I think I'll let Johnny and Karen introduce themselves and talk a little bit about Thinkery and Verse and their philosophy as theater makers.
Thank you, Celia and Susan and ArtSpark and all of our friends and family who are here. We love you. My name is Karen Alvarado. I am the co-artistic director of Thinkery and Verse. I'm from Corpus Christi, Texas, and I spent a lot of years in Austin, Texas, creating art and making original work, and then also working, you know, in the industry. And then I came up to Rutgers to get an MFA in acting, and up here, that's really when Thinkery and Verse took off. That's when we got married, that's when we started our family, and Thinkery and Verse has been there throughout every step of that process. So we create art wherever we're at. So when we visit our family in Texas, we're looking for a project to do there. When we're up here, we look at the stories and history of the community that we live in now and see what we can do to reflect off of that. And that's been true for the past couple of years, at least since I graduated from Rutgers. And I'm Latinx. I also have Indigenous ancestry, and I like to highlight those themes in my work, if at all possible, which was another huge reason why Aftershock La Replica was such an important cornerstone in my artistry as a director. I'd been really wanting to tell a Latinx story, and I have to be specific here because I wanted to tell a Latinx story that concentrated on the Tejano perspective. So Mexican American ancestry, people who had lived for generations in Texas, because that is an American story, but it's a different type of American identity that I don't know is always highlighted.
Yeah, and I'm Johnny Meyer, and I'm the other co-artistic director. My angle on it, on the Aftershock Replica Project, is I'm a military veteran, right? I was in the U.S. Army, airborne infantry, and then went to Ranger School, and then did tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, or Afghanistan and Iraq rather. And so that's my background from it. And I started going into playwriting when I was at the University of Texas at Austin, and I still work in the theater, right, with my wife. And so that's where Thinkery in verse comes out of, is from a sort of a practical need to create work that we found while we were, mulling around different places.
What I think is kind of fun is that when I first was looking at Ava Fest and trying to produce working on theater, and I was helping Bart Fishburne.
He's great.
I met somebody in the lobby of the ground floor theater, and I was sitting there because I was going to do audio description. So I was waiting for someone to show up, and this young woman sat next to me, and she said, "Well, you really need to talk to John Meyer." But I don't know how to get in touch with him or anything. So scribbled on the side of the script that I was going to describe was your name. And so it was meant to be, because I never did reach out, but then all of a sudden I stumbled upon you when we were literally, so it was meant
to be. Bart did it. He did the hookup then. Great. He was Bart got his doctorate at the University of Texas at Austin. We overlapped a bit. And he went on to a different university he's teaching at now.
Yeah, he's in Alabama. We connected over this Veterans Art Festival, and ArtSpark has been working with veterans for 10 years, mainly in the visual art realm, but we have broadened now into writing and some other areas. And so, how would you define what veteran art is, and how do you think it fits into today's America? What's going on in today's America?
Yeah, so I think veteran art, its meaning and its context has changed a lot over the past couple hundred years. So with the sense, the idea of a veterans of a veteran, as an identity or label, has always been in the United States from the Revolutionary period onward, but it picked up a lot of steam in the post-Civil War period, right? When you had virtually an incredible amount of the population mobilized, and the entire country directed towards war. And from then through World War II, you had huge numbers of the population that would be involved in the major conflicts, right? And at least a large chunk of the population would be involved in wars. Not the majority ever, but a large enough that almost everybody would have a brother or sister or son or daughter involved in these things. Mostly sons, I suppose. And from there, so you've got art in the middle of the last century, things like The Best Years of Our Lives, right? Which is something that when it came out after World War II, that the understanding would be that most people could understand what the material was about and what it was describing. But now what happens is going through the 20th century, the latter half, veterans become a smaller piece of the demographic pie. Fewer people are involved in it, especially with the closure of the draft, which was never a perfect process at all. But once that's gone, it's an entirely volunteer force. And so for our forever wars, as some journalists call them, in Iraq and Afghanistan, the percentage of the population involved in this is a tiny fraction, and it's largely a sort of self-selected group that's engaged in these things. And so veteran art becomes a window into, on the one hand, a very small portion of the population, but on the other hand, it's what the majority, a larger chunk of the federal budget goes towards than anything else, right? Like this is the major spending item from the federal government is on defense spending and on these and what happens to these wars. And so that this creates a sort of imbalance and a kind of disconnect between what your soldiers are doing and what your citizens are doing. You kind of lose touch with the citizen soldier army concept, and you've got these people that are taking on this kind of warrior persona, right? And so I don't think it's too surprising that with that disconnect, part of the objective of fighting, one of the things to fight with this disconnect is that you see events like happen with, frankly, on January 6th, right, with the storming of the Capitol. You're looking at the woman who was shot that day was a veteran. One of the primary groups that is being prosecuted for it was the Oath Keepers, people who purport, not all of them are veterans, some of them just claim they are, but people who are, attaching themselves to this identity and this label, and then losing touch with what it was about. And so it works both ways. Both the civilian population loses touch with what the veterans are about, and the veterans lose touch with what democracy is about, what the United States is about. They lose touch with what America looks like outside of the armed forces. And they also get confused, I think, about how should society organize itself. And so these are the things that art can start to have a dialogue about. And
yeah, especially storytelling, which is something that we specialize in, whether it's on theater, in the theater, live, or through a podcast. It's telling these personal narratives of experiences that are happening to people in the apartment next to us that we might never know. And so that's what we lean into to try to put a spotlight on those human experiences.
Mm-hmm.
That's very true. And what you were saying, Johnny, about the disconnect, between civilian and military is really dramatic, because even during World War II, even if you weren't fighting or didn't have someone in the war, you were working toward the war effort. The women were in the factories, and you were donating all your aluminum and your cooking oil and all of that stuff. And the wars now are played out, to me, like a video game. You just watch it on TV. Young people are attracted to go to war because they think it's like a video game, when it really is quite horrifying when you're in the middle of it. I can only imagine. And so, do you think that, and you were saying that you feel that art can be a bridge between the two worlds to try to bring the two worlds to a better understanding of each other?
Yeah, so an example of this is from the Aftershock Replica Project. So within that project, one of the goals is to look at, in particular, why Latinx individuals are joining the military, especially early on in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Huge numbers of people from the Rio Grande Valley especially were joining up, and often for the most dangerous assignments. And so you've got what is it that's drawing people? What's drawing people into that? What are they interested in, and what do they get out of that experience? And I think it's a little confusing for people, because on one hand, it seems to be about reaffirming sort of Latino family values for joining the military.
Cultural identity.
The sense.
The masculine man, machismo, warrior.
All of those things can be reinforced by the experience, but at the same time, there's this counterpole, which is your masculinity can get challenged in the military, or it can be, and you can also have experiences where, if you're experiencing fear, things like that, right? Things that you don't expect. And
It
then
might be seen as weakness in certain,
yeah,
you
in
know,
certain
cultures or situations.
right. And then you've also got higher divorce rates, things like that. So how does that gel with the interest in family? And so these kind of very human questions, these very human interests, are kind of what we were interested in exploring and showing the ground and the overlap between those things.
Yeah, and in the play, we got to explore those stories through character arcing, right? Seeing how one character thought about joining the Army, what their pool was for actually joining, what their experience and engagement with war was, and then what it was like coming home to their family and back to their culture. For instance, that would be one arc. And then in the podcast, we got to actually go further than that and not only tell that story and ask questions about that story, but investigate and start asking questions. Well, why? What is it about the Army that is so appealing to an 18-year-old Latino kid from Austin, Texas, for instance?
We also, because of the nature of podcasting, we wound up challenging some of the assumptions that our characters in the play were making, right? Because if they're the characters in the play are in the military, right? We're talking about a younger set. And the people that we're interviewing on the podcast are often older folks who are looking on the other end of that experience, right? And so
they're able to look back at like, oh yeah, I was acting the fool at that point in my life, or like at that point, that's really what I wanted, but now I see X, Y, and Z. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, or they would do it all again.
Yeah.
Or they wouldn't do any of it. Or they, just it depends. And you also got a sense of the variability, especially for women, huge variability in the experience. Some had extremely positive experiences, but her level of harassment and the higher possibility of military sexual trauma made the challenges they faced much tougher potentially.
And that seemed to be a general through line from a lot of their stories, was the having to compartmentalize femininity and as well as feelings in general, just to survive in their day to day.
And we are aware of instances of men experiencing military sexual trauma, but it's the case that on the whole, as Jenny Pakanowski, one of our friends and writers, put, she had to be ready to kind of fend this off constantly. Like she had to have a certain mindset in order to keep this stuff, in order to protect herself.
Well, many of the female veterans that we work with, once we get to know them, will always, almost 9 times out of 10 will reveal that there was some military sexual trauma in their service. So it is pretty widespread, and I'm glad to see that the military is maybe beginning to take some awareness of that. But you said the feminine, looking at the feminine experience in the military, which leads me to think about the fact that, Karen, you were the director of this. And so with the feminine, do you feel between the two of you, was that a conscious choice? I mean, I know it was a conscious choice because of Karen being a Latinx, but was also, were you wanting there to be the feminine molding of the story?
I think, yeah, that was definitely a conscious choice, and actually in how we cast it as well. It was 6 actors, 4 of which were female identifying, and because of that, the stories do follow more female perspectives than men, and the reason behind that is because it's a lesser told and known story. I mean, there are movies about men joining the Army. There are movies about men getting out of the Army and experiencing PTSD. There are tons of books about that. Even fewer about Latinx men doing it, and even fewer about Latinx women doing it. So I really wanted to see where that marginalization was and explore it as much as I could. And I had just a brilliant cast, and the collaborators with Teatro Vivo were amazing as well. And I guess that kind of goes into how difficult it is to create something absolutely new. With Dionysus in America, it was this fantastic structure because we had a great adapter, Jenny Pakanowski, who is a female vet. putting her lens on a classic play. Whereas this one, we really had to figure out what we wanted to say and then how we wanted to say it. So find the writers, the veterans and the Latinos who could do that, or write it ourselves.
Yeah, and kind of piece it around that.
Yeah,
It was
I remember going to drop some stuff off over at James Burnside's house, and you were all gathered there around a big table, and lots of conversation was going on. So talk to me about how you did that. I mean, so you didn't have a play, right? It was an idea. And
Yeah,
so how did you take that idea and create something? I mean, that's what I love about theater. You know, we create something out of nothing. You know?
yeah.
Yeah.
But it's
Well, I
nothing.
think
It's there at the ether. It's just waiting for us to grab it and create it, you know?
Yeah, it came, the germ of it came out of this idea from conversation with a friend up here, Peter Moline. He's a retired colonel, and when he looks at literature, modern war literature, right? That's his thing. And we were interested in where the blind spots were. And the first one we found was that, like, we were looking for this play about, the Tejano Experience War, written by a veteran, and we couldn't find it. So that was our first problem.
we couldn't find it. And I think it had a good script presented itself to us that was about the Janos or a veteran who happened to be Latinx, or written by a Latinx veteran or a Latinx writer. Any one of those combos, we would have been happy to probably explore, but they just didn't exist. So it was born out of necessity.
Well, there were some options that explored the Puerto Rican, New Yorican perspective.
Yes.
And there were some options that, so like northeastern United States is kind of where they were beset. And then there were some, there were some traces here and there from playwrights that were aware that the Iraq War was going on, and so they have a play about a character who went to Iraq or something like that. But they didn't. These weren't really pieces that we knew that. Where were we going to perform? We knew that this was going to be performed at the Mexican American Cultural Center in downtown Austin,
Texas,
right?
In
Texas. So it needed to speak to that audience. It needed to be down that wavelength. That's what our view was. And so we came up with this sense, well, okay, let's grab pieces. We know that, what do we know that is underexplored? Like the sense, the sort of tension in Latinx military service, the ties between, there's a sense of religion, but there's a contradictory sense of like that machismo violence, which almost seems like a kind of anti-religion sometimes.
Right. And then
on the one hand, it's patriarchal, so it makes perfect sense within a Catholic context. On the other hand, it's like all about like
and then again on
the
religious front, the high rate of marriage at a young age, and really sticking to one spouse the rest of your life, right? Again, that Catholic sentiment that is very much rooted in Latinx culture.
Right.
And but you put a bunch of 18-year-olds together, ship them off to war, the tensions and passions and time is running out, and infidelity left and right. So having to abandon bits and pieces of your identity, which may have happened naturally as somebody grows up, but it's all in a pressure cooker.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily, we didn't judge any of these things as bad. These were rather just how it is, right? Like this is how it is. This is what people are living through, and that way we could kind of explore these parallel characters and enjoy them being next to each other and kind of rocking it, right?
Yeah. Right, and that was very evident in the performance, was that it was just, you were just telling the story of these individuals, and sometimes you were at home before leaving for war, then you were there in battle. Yeah, so but there was never a sense of an apology or an explanation. It was like, this is life. This is, and the presentations were very much like that. They were almost like monologues, a lot of them. but
Mhm.
but yeah, I felt that, and that the rawness of it was beautiful, and of course the way that you staged it at the Mexican American Cultural Center. They basically they were in an auditorium, and Karen flipped it around and put the play on the auditorium risers, and the audience sat on the floor, and that was a stroke of genius, I have to say, my dear. It really, really. It really was worked really nicely.
Thank you. My lighting designer almost killed me.
Yeah.
Because all the lights are rigged to go towards the audience.
They had to work so hard.
But they were great. Again, Austin artists are just fantastic.
Patrick Anthony did
It gave
that.
it such a dimension, to be on those risers. It gave it such a really, it was lovely. So during ABAFest, you both worked as a team on the two pieces. You talked about Jenna Pakinowski's Dionysus in America, and then you went right into Aftershock, La Replica, which are two very different plays. And so, what were the challenges of working with a quasi-classical piece, which was the Dionysus, and then moving into Aftershock? Were there things that helped, or were there things that hindered? What was that like?
Well, the second piece, of course, was collated with a lot of different voices, so like Victor and Zunza, for example.
Rocio, Mary Alice.
Rocio, Mary Alice.
Lots of different Latinx perspectives, and we wanted to honor their work by using a lot of almost documentary style theater. So using that
a lot of verbatim techniques, drawing from oral history,
making a collage of a play. So that was really hard.
It's really hard, but Karen's training deals with a lot of that. She trained with Kevin Kittle up at, yeah.
It didn't look hard. I mean, it looked, you know what I mean? So you pulled it off very well, my dear.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, she did. I agree.
Well, a big part of the artistry that I try to lean into, and that I'm leaning into more and more as I get older, oddly, is physicalizing the experience as much as possible. So putting as much weight on, textual emphasis as on embodying a character and embodying an experience. So a lot of what we did was in the rehearsal room, if you had no voice and you had to express your character's full arc, how would you physically show that in 2 minutes? And the actors were brilliant. I mean, I'm sure they were exhausted. They had full days of work and then they came to rehearsal at night, but they were in such a great creative space that they were able to trust me enough to go on this physical, emotional journey. And then from what they did, I was able to honestly just be an arranger and an editor at that point. They gave me such great raw material that I was able to put it together in a way that served the story.
Yeah.
Which is something I think is the benefit of this type of new work, is that it allows every person in the process to be a generative, creative artist, as opposed to just an interpretive artist. So you're actually creating something as opposed to just saying, here's the script, feel it out and interpret it, right? Which is the role actors play 9 times out of 10. So they got more than what they bargained for, and I'm so grateful that they went along with it.
Yeah, they did great. They generated text in some cases. They did. They thought through the connecting tissue of the play. It was.
They presented music when it came down to like music underscoring stuff. We worked with a fantastic sound engineer, David Damaris, who's local to Austin. And then when it came to the Spanish language songs, I turned to the cast and I said, which songs do you love? What song do you hear in the back of your head when you think of this scene? And they came to me with options. And then, of course, them being amazingly talented, they were like, oh, yeah, let me just plunk this out on the guitar and sing it beautifully. I'm like, well, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
And many of them, I think, had relatives that were, this was not so. One, they're rooted in the culture, right? So they know the song, they knew the songs, they knew the feeling. If we said, hey, there's cat calls in this part, special kind. Yeah, you know exactly. Oh, you know it. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, that that they just understood what was going on.
Yeah.
So we didn't have to do a lot of dramaturgical explanation about
About the culture.
about the culture, right? So part of the idea of that riser effect, right, is mimicking the altares, which is like the
altars,
the
ofrendas.
yeah, prayer altars that are created for people who have died, often kept in a home, but also you see them in cathedrals and churches, or the exact location where it happened, if it's like an auto accident or something. And so the stage was able to replicate that, and the cast got it, right? We didn't have to sit down for 2 to 5 dramaturgical days explaining what that would mean.
And there were little offerings on the sides of the risers and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
go ahead. No, go ahead,
oh,
Johnny.
Yeah.
You worked. I was actually supposed to direct Dionysus, but I got called away at the last minute, so Johnny took the reins on that one.
Yeah. So the big difference on that one, the classical play, Ginny Pakanowski was adapting Euripides, and she didn't cut anything, and so there was lots of jarring, strange moments that are almost inexplicable, and that you wouldn't do normally, right? But part of my mission there was I wanted to appreciate Ginny Pakanowski as a combat veteran, right? And she wants to be known as a combat veteran, right? She's got it tattooed on her forearm because she got tired of people making them
thinking she was admin because
thinking she was admin or married to a combat veteran or something. And no, she's like, I was there. So she was seeing a lot of action in this play. And so the goal there was to kind of respect that and make it and make that and then stage it and make it work on its own terms. And it was the goals of Euripides were so different from what we normally think of as dramatic goals. They're not the Aristotelian. It didn't have any of the interests that Aristotelian drama has, or Brechtian drama, or modern drama. It was on its own wavelength of making life suck. So that was really weird to experience, that step by step.
I was they rehearsed in the building, and I worked every night up in my office, and I would hear these laments and these wails, and it was a remarkable journey with the rehearsals.
Yeah, but the female chorus, they were great.
Yeah, Ginny centered women's voices in this in a way that the Bacchae always has women, but they're usually kind of just pliant and not there. And so Ginny did some gender twisting of the making the god Dionysus.
Actually,
and just some twists there, and it didn't. And that was interesting. From a critical perspective, you kind of had two different problems in trying to bring these things to the public. On the one hand, with Dionysus in America, it was extremely polarizing. People either loved it and called us and sent us messages, tried to hug the cast, things like that. Right. They either were ecstatic about it or they were really offended, and there was nothing in between. And we wound up. An example of this is the Austin Chronicle reviewer. We went great with Broadway World, and then with the Austin Chronicle reviewer, she was expecting, because of Ginny's name on the thing, and expecting a kind of women's liberation feeling from it. But that's not the Bacchae. The Bacchae sets that instinct up and then betrays it, and Ginny stuck with that. And so that created a real puzzle there.
And then with Aftershock, the disappointment was that we couldn't get a reviewer. It's like nobody wanted to review Latinx theater, which is highly offensive, right? Especially look at the population of Austin, Texas, or of Texas, or of the United States.
Right. That was a real frustration, and a smoldering point of anger. I know that was happening. But I want to switch right now because when we first talked about trying to take Aftershock, resurrect it, and take it on the road, And then when the COVID hit and we just couldn't do that, and I came to you with the idea that let's do a podcast, you weren't really warm to that idea at the very beginning. So what was the process that where you came around and really fully embraced that, and how did you then have to think through and make this into a podcast?
It's a good question. I think that the podcasting thing.
Yeah, yes, I think we had just done 2 podcasts, which makes perfect sense, right? You're like, I'm assuming, Celia, you were like, they know how to do this. They're getting good at this. They can explore it through this. So I think at that point we were ready to shift to film, right? That's something that we were thinking about that, and then we realized that's not going to happen right now either, you know? So then when we finally did make the mental shift to podcasting, it all fell into place really, really quickly and really simply. And we worked on it in a way that we had never worked on it before, with the skeleton crew. So our other podcasts, there was tons of producers and tons of writers and tons of several hosts, guests and whatnot. And this one, it was myself, Johnny, and then our wonderful kind of podcast manager and sound engineer, Erin Bogert, who's actually on the call. And she was absolutely a wonderful collaborator every step of the way. And it actually went smoother and faster with kind of the skeleton crew, because we were all 100% on the same page. We knew what story and what type of podcast we wanted to make. And then it just rolled right along. And Johnny, as the dramaturg, was really important in lining up some really smart guests. Yeah.
So we had, in one of our episodes, for example, we've got Tom Palima, who's on the call now, and then Victor Nzunza, a poet out in California. And that allowed us to explore, we were exploring issues of masculinity at war and the sense of door kicker and aggression.
And then the rituals
towards that. And then we also had Colonel Lisa Furman. She's at the time that she retired, she was the highest ranking Latinx Latino officer in the Air Force. And so she's just an amazing perspective. And then she went to Texas State as one of the.
She's the military liaison at the UTSA now.
Yeah, and so she has just an incredible. That's a colonel's perspective is very different and so valuable. And it's actually really affirming when you're working on this stuff, and then somebody who's been a career soldier like Lisa says, "Oh, that feels right." Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's one thing to be working with somebody who was in for 3 years, 4 years, what have you. Another thing to be working with somebody who's been for, how long was Lisa in? 25 years?
Yeah.
And she was like somebody who rocked it for 25 years and still is able to see herself in these pieces. That's really wonderful.
That's
yeah.
great.
And what was I going to say? It's gone. Okay.
So yeah, it expanded to this podcasting. It's stressful, right? Also because of the timeline. Like the timeline stretches out in ways, and you don't get the high of working in the room with everybody. Yeah. I think that's something that Aaron missed. Aaron's missed, I think, and we've missed, and our whole team missed. It's not as much fun on Zoom, that's for sure.
In the middle, after a theater production, everybody we have a cast party, or we all get to high five or hug, and it's just you put so much work into something, and then there's it's just like out in the ether.
Or you de-stress, right? Like sometimes an actor will collaborate or understand very well the stage manager or the director, but not the writer or what have you. But we can't navigate all that stuff. There's just a distance,
Right.
And so it stays distant. It's professional. It's professional, but it's not the. It doesn't have the social warmth that you get from working in a live environment.
It's
don't get that, in the theater. You just get even if the audience is sitting in the dark, you feel the audience, and you get they're rooting for you and they're with you and all of that. And you just don't get that through like a Zoom call. So you have to work a lot harder. But we had originally talked about just doing 4 episodes, and you arrange them around the 4 the 4 jobs
fire team members, yeah.
But all of a sudden you called me and you said we can't do 4, we have to do 8. I think it was first we have to do 1 more. That was it. We're going to do 1 more, and then it was we need to do 3 more actually. So we ended up with 8, which is delightful, But how did that happen?
Well, the first one was we knew there were some questions we needed to get from Tom.
From Tom, yeah. First it was Tom. It was like, I didn't get to ask this really important question, and I know he's going to give a great answer, and I need to give time for this. So
and he did. So check out the Tom Plima bonus episode.
Yeah. So that was the first one, and then I've been working with, or I guess you've worked with them before I did. There's a company up here in New York called Poetic Theater Productions. The past year and a half, I've been working with their Veteran Voices program, which is where veterans write and then perform their personal narratives. Veterans and family members. They just switched that up, which I love, right? Because I'm a family member, and now I'm allowed in the club, which is
really important.
Which is another big reason why these projects have been so important in terms of bridging the gap between, a military union.
So yeah, there's like the military experience is much of a silo. You don't need to add on to it by excluding the family members again. They were already excluded from the first experience.
But
yeah, so Poetic Theater's been doing these interviews. Ginny Pakinowski's been hosting them, who we've already been talking about.
I've been watching some of them. Yeah.
They've been great. And what we've decided was like, let's bounce off of some of that material. They're using Zoom, and that creates an audio file already, so we could repackage that and get that to a wider audience with the ones that we were already involved with, where there's a substantial overlap.
Some of the people that they were already planning on interviewing were on my short list of people that I wanted to interview also, at people that I met through being one of their storytelling facilitators. So they were already on my list. So I'm like, we might as well just keep on going.
And there was this an
We're on a
example.
roll here. So I want to say that Erin has put in the chat, she was responding to your sense of that the podcast and the Zoom is so different. She was like, for sure, there's definitely a sense of no closure. You pour your heart and soul into something, and then all of a sudden it's all done, And so it's learning to find a meaning or some sort of give back, in this different environment. And I also wanted to say about Tom, one of the things about Tom that was so, that we appreciated so much was that Tom teaches classical, the classics in UT, right? And he can jump in if he wants to correct me. But he sent he made it an assignment for his students, I assume for extra credit, to come to the plays. And I think that's why you really were really felt drawn to do an interview with him, because of the perspective that not only did he give to the plays, but that we learned from the essays that his students wrote about their experiences at the play.
They were amazing. Yeah.
If I can leap in just briefly, I also was with Dionysus in America too. More and more, I'm seeing the way in which the University of Texas has really become a kind of moated medieval town. It's not reaching out into these kinds of community things. So I take every opportunity I can to see what's going on locally. I'm now on the board of the Spectrum Theater, which is the all-black theater company in Austin. And cool. So the opportunity to take a mythology class and have them go and see when we're looking at plays and epics that deal with the experience of war so realistically, and go down and see the Ofrendas, and then see this amazing play, Aftershock La Replica, and it's speaking to kids who are, military age, 18 to 22. Yeah, I was so grateful to Karen and Johnny and Jenny for these amazing productions.
Well, some of your students, Tom, were from Southeast Asia, and they were, frankly, I mean, in their essays, they expressed some shock to recognize not their culture, but rather the ofrendas are something that are very similar to
Sure.
things that they have, shrines that they build in their culture, and that
Yeah,
they don't really feel, yeah.
well,
In
and
the
Johnny,
United States,
you guys talked about when you put on a production and then poof, there it's gone. You know that one of the great sources of trauma about from in any war, but especially from Vietnam onward, when you could transport somebody from a firefight in Vietnam and they could be in Oakland 72 hours later, or East St. Louis 72 hours later, you have the same thing going on now. They're there, intense experience, and all of a sudden they're back in what a normalcy. So the whole idea of getting these students to be able to feel the plays. It's even a problem in the classroom. You're reading things that were supposed to be dramatic productions. You're reading them as texts, right? Or oral songs at great public festivals with frescoes around that were depicting the scenes of battles and hunts and things of this sort. That was the ancient environment, and all of a sudden you have words on a printed page with odd-sounding names and a lot of cultural differences that are hard to explicate. So to be able to get the students to go from that and then to someplace that's a full immersion, it's what Bob Dylan said in his sort of infamous Emergency Civil Rights Award speech in December of '63, when he said, I could see myself in Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, he could, because what Dylan tries to do is to feel what people are going through. And the number one rock and roll song of all times has as its chorus, "How does it feel? How does it feel? To be on your own, no direction home, like a Rolling Stone." So Dylan understands. He said in that speech, I read a lot of history books, but nobody ever tells you how the people feel, right? They give you the events, but how did people feel? And this is what, well, Celia, your work with Glenn and with Karen and Johnny is so important. It's the theater that allows people to feel.
Yes, it does, and it allows people to feel in an environment where they don't maybe have to reveal about themselves, but they can take it in and maybe learn something about themselves. Absolutely. So now you've all had a little taste of Tom, so you know that to listen to his podcast, he talks much more about that and the connection of what he sees between what the work that Thinkery and Verse was doing and in the podcast. So I want to say that, do we have any questions from the audience? I didn't know if Aaron wanted to pop on. I don't want to put you on the spot, Aaron, if you had anything you wanted to add. But otherwise, I know that sometimes people are eating their dinner and things like that. So, but where can people find the podcast? That's a very important thing. Where is it now?
Aftershock La Replica, you can search for it, probably using the word Aftershock on any major podcast platform. So your iPhone,
Apple Podcasts, Spotify.
But you can also find it if you go to thinkeryandverse.org. You can find it. You can find it there as well. It's on our landing page right now.
Yeah.
Perfect. Great.
Top of our
And it's going to live there for a while, I would assume. And it's you can find it on any platform, right? You can just search for
That's
Thinkery,
right.
and it's in the
Correct.
Thinkery and Verse podcast. It's going to be, is it episode 2 or how?
Oh, sorry, yes, it's season 2. Season
But
2.
that's marked pretty well. It'll be pretty
Yeah.
obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Susan has texted me that her computer has frozen up, so otherwise she would be coming in right now to thank everyone for coming. But we do have a few more minutes. If anyone has a question,
Well, well, not so much a question, but it's again a way in which there's this continuous stream, and Johnny really went over quite well how you had full, and you too, Celia, you brought up the point that during World War II, it was a mass mobilization. People were even supposed to save chicken fat, right? So everybody could participate. You were having a chicken dinner, and you could save the fat, but now we have this highly marginalized, so-called all volunteer army, and there's a very fine book called The Casualty Gap that proves that again, as with most wars fought in human history, it's the poor and the marginalized who are the main participants. But one of the things I wanted to get across is that it's no accident that the 50s were the period of great mobilization for civil rights among blacks and browns, right? That because Medgar Evers, the guy who was gunned down in 1963 in Mississippi, was a World War II vet, and he came back and he found he was in the Jim Crow South and couldn't even use the drinking fountain unless it was the one that was designated for blacks, or go into a public toilet unless it was a blacks. And so we're looking now for social change, but one of the great vehicles for social change in the past was everybody mixing in something like a 4-year volunteer, the 18 to 22. So some kind of way of getting all Americans at that crucial age to be able to do public service and have blacks, browns, whites, men, women, all kinds of sexual identification all pooled together would really be a real plus. I don't know what you guys think about that, Johnny.
Well, William James wrote an essay about that, where he's talking about a moral. I'm getting the exact phrase wrong, but a moral authority that you get from that kind of highly collaborative institution that is the military, right?
Mm-hmm.
And from that, you've got from that idea that William James had, you've got things, different service corps out there, including the Peace Corps, but that there's not that kind of moral organization is something that people will always strive for and be looking for, and they'll miss once it's gone.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, alternatives too, because we don't need everybody to have a gun, and we don't need everybody that's not the situation we're in. We're in one where we do need everybody to view each other as co-equal citizens, though, and to view each other as participants here, and to understand that everybody does make sacrifices for our country and for each other.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
part of the plot of Best Years of Our Lives, which you brought up before, right? The start of your historical survey was you had people from all different social strata, right? And they all knew each other because they had been in the war together. It was very hard if you owned a company to screw your workforce if the guys were fighting you were saving your life over in the Battle of the Bulge or in the Pacific Island.
Well, we
There's
sort
just the only point of connection.
had that. We sort of had that again with 9/11. So many of the people that went to Afghanistan and Iraq joined up, out of a reason that they wanted to go and fight for the country. They wanted to defend the country. But unfortunately, the war has, like they said, the war that's gone on forever, but it didn't mobilize the country because we didn't know what we were fighting for. my parents both served overseas in World War II, and they were very clear what they were fighting for, and the whole country knew what we were fighting for. And I think that was the part of the issue with what's been happening over the last 20 years, is that we don't know, and people have gotten very comfortable here. And again, the only reason I know people that have served is because of the work I do with ArtSpark, and I've met many veterans. But I could probably tell you that most of my friends outside of the veteran community don't really know anybody. They don't have a family member. They don't know anyone, and so it's very, very. They can't touch it. They don't understand it, and
they can't feel it. To go back to that, they can't feel it. Yeah.
To me, is so important and so valuable, and why I really applaud both Karen and Johnny for the work that you do, and Aaron for the work that you do to support them, and everyone else who's on the call who may be either in the military, ex-military, or doing artwork. I don't see anybody. I just see a lot of initials. But I think it's really important, and it's been my pleasure to work with both of you. And one of the questions I was supposed to ask is what's next, but I think we'll just have to leave it there and let everybody kind of wonder and look forward to what's next.
That's right.
Thanks, Celia.
Thanks, Celia. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you to our ArtSpark Texas funders: Texas Commission on the Arts, St. David's Foundation, Cultural Arts City of Austin Economic Development, Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, Austin Public Library, Donald D. Hamill Foundation.